All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. And welcome to another special edition of the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. You know, the Biden administration has commenced a criminal case against former president and Biden's chief political rival in 2024, Donald Trump. In bringing these 37 charges in federal court by a D.C. federal grand jury, the Biden administration, in the form of special counsel Jack Smith and his boss, Merrick Garland of the Justice Department, accused the president of many things. They accuse him of taking documents that weren't his because they were super secret. And that's because they say so. And if he were found guilty, which if the charges didn't convince you enough, they would be the fruition of full banana republic status in the U.S. By bringing these charges, which depend on ignoring separation of powers, the Presidential Records Act, maybe even the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments, President Biden and his radical minions are hoping that they'll win the public opinion battle, which presents the question to the American people. It goes like this. Do you hate President Trump more than you love the Constitution? Notwithstanding the fact that this case belongs in my compost pile, President Trump could end up in prison. Really could. That's just my layperson's opinion. My guest on the Adult in the Room podcast is Harvey Silverglate, an esteemed civil rights attorney, a classical liberal, author of this book, 3 Felonies a Day, How the Feds Target the Innocent. He's also on the legal team now of former Trump attorney John Eastman, who's under indictment for providing the president with legal advice based on legal theories with which the regime did not agree. Therefore, he was charged. So now the California bar is trying to disbar Eastman, a former law school dean in good standing. And of this case, Harvey Silverglate wrote on his website, as a criminal defense and civil liberties attorney and writer for over a half century, I have seen many miscarriages of justice caused by stampedes led by politicians, prosecutors, and alas, journalists. These investigations are made more dangerous by the ease with which one can be investigated and even indicted, as I've tried to explain in my 2009 book entitled 3 Felonies a Day, How the Feds Target the Innocent. The California bar's decision, he goes on, to seek disciplinary action against an attorney in a case as hotly disputed and nuanced as this particular one, both legally and factually, is equally troubling and should be to all attorneys who recognize the importance of our adversarial system of justice. He said something similar, and it seems to me he could have said this very thing about Donald Trump. Welcome back to the Adult in the Room podcast, Harvey Silverglate. Thank you so much for coming on. And I'd just like to ask you an opening question, and it's this. Are we in a banana republic status now by your reckoning with this Trump indictment?
Well, first of all, Eastman has not been indicted yet, and we're hoping to avoid an indictment if we can get an audience with the prosecutors. Because I think it's quite clear, and I'm not just saying this as an advocate, that John Eastman has not committed any crimes. But, you know, the prosecutors have been imbibing this culture of thinking that just about anything can be criminalized because the federal statutes especially are so broad and so vague. You know, it outlaws mail fraud and wire fraud. That means any fraud that is perpetrated by the use of the telephone lines or the mails or so forth and so on. But the crimes are not generally defined. The means are defined, but not the crimes. And that's the reason why I compare it to Stalinist Russia, where Beria, the secret police chief, said, "Show me the man and I'll show you the crime." We are the sense of my 3 Felonies a Day book was that any American who gets up in the morning and goes to sleep at night between getting up and going to sleep, has probably arguably committed 3 federal felonies. Well, this is not how a libertarian democracy is supposed to function. I think that it's time for a complete revamping of the federal criminal code where specific crimes are outlawed rather than these vague general mail fraud, wire fraud, because it gives federal prosecutors enormous destructive power. And I can relate that to these Trump prosecutions. And let me tell you something else. Even if a reasonable analysis of the facts and the law show that Trump committed crimes, I think it is highly improper and unwise to be prosecuting him before a highly contested Republican primary that will then result in a presidential election. Because what it does is it's a crime against the voters, because it seeks to deprive the voters of the ability to reelect Trump if they want to. Now, I'm not a Trump fan. I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't vote for Biden either. I voted Libertarian. But it seems to me that this is still a democracy, and that if Trump can get the nomination, he should be allowed to run. There's a 5-year statute of limitations. Whoever the attorney general is could seek an indictment within 5 years. What's the rush? Well, there's only one explanation for the rush. It's what I call candidate suppression. We've heard of voter suppression. This is candidate suppression. It's a setup. They want Biden to run against somebody that he could beat. And there's some question as to whether he can beat Trump. Biden is not, that's another issue. I don't want to keep going on without you asking me questions, but I think it's outrageous that Biden is running for another term. He's too old. Now, I'm 81 now. I wouldn't run for president of the United States because I don't think that a person that old should be in the White House. There's a lack, a lowering acuity of your mental abilities, your physical abilities. We see him stumbling all over the place. So the voters don't realize that they're really voting for whether Kamala Harris should be president of the United States. So, and you notice there's this vigorous now. How many candidates are there now vying for the Republican nomination?
Oh,
maybe
at least 5 that I'm aware of.
At least 12, I think.
Really?
They grow every day. I think the last one who got in was Chris Christie.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that tranche.
But there's no contest in the Democrats. Now, there are at least a dozen Democrats who, it seems to me, would be qualified to run. I don't know whether I'd vote for them. I probably would vote Libertarian again. But it's a disservice to the party and to the electorate and to the nation to have somebody like Biden running for re-election. So there are more things wrong with this election than any I can think of in my lifetime. Well, I've just that's my rant. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I have to say that you might be being naive, Harvey, because I mean, the fact that Trump, they're trying to ice out Trump for the 24 election isn't necessarily, it's a feature, not a bug with what's going on right now. And I think that they are trying to do that, but there might be something else, some 3D chess move in there somewhere that perhaps we're not aware of at the moment. But they're indicting Trump over him keeping what the law says are his own records, which are constitutionally his own records. So if you agree with that, great. Can they indict him over something like that? Or do you disagree that these are his own records?
I think that it's a question. That is, I don't think either side can with 100% assurance argue its case. But the problem is that is precisely what reasonable doubt is about. And when there's some question, they shouldn't be indicting somebody. I know, as I said, I'm not sure which side is right, but if I'm not sure, then the system isn't sure. And so the whole thing stinks from top to bottom, and it looks like a pretext because it is a pretext.
That's right. Okay, so what about vagueness in the law? Isn't there something against the overwhelming or over generalization or vagueness of a law which prohibits its being used in this manner against an individual?
The reason for that is that unless a law is clear, there's no confidence that somebody acted with a knowing intent to violate a clear legal obligation. That is the basis of the criminal justice system. We prosecute people who act in a manner knowing that it's in violation of the law. And in these kinds of federal prosecutions that are so vague, there's a real problem. It's inherent in the federal system, but it is particularly inherent when you're dealing with a president who dealt with documents where there's a reasonable argument that what he did was lawful. There's an argument that that is unlawful. It's lawful. They should have brought a civil action and let a federal court decide who's right. That's how you deal with situations where there's vagueness. You bring a civil action. They brought a criminal action in order to keep him from running against a very unpopular Democratic candidate looking for re-election.
Do national security laws trump Presidential Records Act and Article 2?
Well, it's not a question of whether Article 2 is more important than national security. It's a question of what the law means. And I think that there is a real question here as to what the law means. Presidents do have enormous power in national security areas, but those powers are endowed by law and hopefully by clear statutes. Many federal statutes are not clear, and that raises problems in not only national security cases, but in many of my clients' cases.
You know, it's kind of interesting on statutes and stuff. We've talked about the Chevron Doctrine before, the preference before for giving the people in the bureaucracy the ability to clarify a law that Congress hasn't made very clear. So we get rid of the Chevron deference in the next session of the
regulatory power you're talking about.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. So, but then we still allow something to be so vague in criminal law, which is now cornered a president. It seems odd, don't you think?
Well, it's the joke is, and it's not such a joke because there's a lot of truth to it, that federal law can be the entire federal criminal code can be replaced by one sentence: "Thou shalt not do that which should not be done." There you go.
How unusual is it for a prosecutor to invoke the speedy trial preference? Isn't it the defendant's privilege or something that the defendant would have some say over? Because that's what Jack did and Jack Smith did here. Yes,
but the reason they're looking to try it quickly is they want to disable him from being a candidate. I mean, this is all so transparent that it would be a joke if it was funny, but it's not funny.
Yeah. The person who's the president's valet, the former Navy officer who began to work for President Trump after he left office, has been also brought up on charges as a co-conspirator and someone who engaged in obstruction of justice. Is it obstruction of justice to say in an interview with lawyers that he doesn't remember, doesn't know?
Well, it's not obstruction of justice if it's clear that he's lying. There are perjury prosecutions. Obstruction is one of those, again, vague terms. What is an obstruction of justice? Perjury is simple, that you knowingly tell a material lie, knowing that you're lying. That's materiality and knowledge and intent are crucial in perjury. Obstruction of justice is one of those wishy-washy kind of things. You made it more difficult for the prosecutors. What does it even mean, obstruction of justice?
Mm-hmm. So I'm just trying to get the pecking order here. For example, the special counsel works for the Attorney General, who works for the President of the United States in the executive branch, Article 2. So somehow Congress has been asked to measure, weigh in here. And so first of all, do these players who are engaged right now in trying to wrest away the authority of the president to determine what is a personal record and classify and declassify, do they have the right to do this?
Well, Congress can act by legislation, but when it doesn't act by legislation, then questions arise. Let me give you an example. The January 6th committee did something that's unprecedented and, in my view, clearly unconstitutional. They refer in the January 6th report, they referred the report to the Department of Justice with a recommendation that prosecutions be brought. Now, that's not the role of Congress. That is, Congress makes the law. The executive enforces them. It is a violation of the separation of powers for a congressional committee to recommend prosecution. I've been practicing law since 1967, and I can tell you I can't think of a single instance where that has happened. The Congress, when it wanted to examine Watergate and Richard Nixon, it established this committee with powers. It specified certain powers. That hasn't been done here. So, Jamie Raskin, is he running the country? I mean, this is all so crazy. And if you just take a step back, you say to yourself, it's Trump mania. This would not have happened except for this pathological hatred of Donald Trump.
Sure. Okay. So that brings up my first question, or the question posed in the introduction to this podcast. And it was or is it really a choice between hatred of Trump and doing anything to get him and the love of the Constitution? Because I really think that is where we are.
Well, I think
and that's why they're doing it, because Donald Trump is just such a douchebag to so many people.
Well, if being a douchebag is a crime,
right,
we don't have enough prisons.
That's correct. Exactly right.
It's
not a crime to be a jerk.
It is not a crime to be a jerk, because if it were, first of all, the definition of jerk is too vague to survive constitutional scrutiny. I might know who the jerks are, but not everybody would agree with my definition of what a jerk is and who's a jerk. The thing about this country is that it is the most diverse country in the world in every way, ideologically, ethnically, philosophically, and that's because it's a nation of immigrants. If you have most nations, the overwhelming number of people are of the same ethnicity, the same religion, the same race. We don't have that. We have an enormous number of African Americans. We have an enormous number of Asians. We have an awful number of Caucasians, and the Caucasians are broken down into people whose ancestors immigrated from England, from Russia, from Poland, like my grandparents were immigrated from Russia and Poland, from all over the world. And so, we don't agree on everything because it's such a, this is not like Sweden, for God's sakes. And so we need clear laws. That's the reason we need clear laws, because in the absence of clear laws, we disagree on things. And the majority of Congress votes to pass a clear law. And as a nation that's law-abiding, we tend to accept it. This country has a long record of the acceptance, for example, of Supreme Court opinions. There have been very unpopular Supreme Court opinions, and yet they're obeyed. Why is that so? Because we have inculcated this idea of the rule of law, that in order not to be a nation of tyrants, we have the law that we follow, and we agree to follow it even if we don't agree with it. well, a lot of these basic fundamental assumptions are being upset in the pursuit of Donald Trump. It's quite remarkable.
It is quite remarkable, but I know one thing for sure. They drum out Trump, for example, in the 2024 election, maybe. Then what happens? All of a sudden, Ron DeSantis, the next in line, is going to become the most hated man in America by the media as well as everyone else, because that's just the game. It ain't the guy, it's the game. It's real easy to hate Trump. He's a blowhard. He says stuff like blah, blah. He's not as big a blowhard as Biden, but he's in that rarefied portion of blowhards. He's up there above them all, and both of them are. And I think that people need to, be the adult in the room, so to speak, and just take a look at what they're asking someone to be prosecuted over. They're asking him to be prosecuted over the use of documents that were, I think, inarguably his to have. But you disagree. You think there's a little bit of
I disagree with the inarguably
opacity in there.
I think it's a reasonable argument. When you have reasonable arguments, you don't go prosecuting people.
Well, yeah, exactly. And it's not even opaque, Harvey. There are 3 major cases in which the Presidential Records Act has said overtly that the president has the right to determine what's classified, what is national security, and all of that stuff. And by virtue of walking out of the White House, i.e. Bill Clinton's sock drawer with 47 tapes, he can determine that which is against, contrary to national security. He has the sole authority to do that.
I think that is the better argument. It's not 100%, but it is the better argument.
It's the only one we've got, right? It's the only one we've got.
Yes.
And it's bootstrapped, if you will. It's not even bootstrapped. It's like legit.
It's also very clear that other presidents have done exactly the same thing and have not been gone after.
Absolutely. There are 3 cases right now. Hillary Clinton, she destroyed evidence. That was an obstruction of justice, clearly.
Right.
Clearly that was, and nothing happened to her. And I don't like to point at they didn't like her enough to, go after her. They didn't like him well enough to go after him. And guess what? What's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. We have to get above the personalities involved here, right? Now, I have a question. Since no other presidents have ever been indicted and criminally prosecuted for possessing so-called national security classified documents, any classification, can this Trump indictment be said to be selective prosecution on its face?
Yes. Anyone with half a brain realizes that's exactly what it is.
But guess who's prosecuting him? The Justice Department under the Biden administration, the guy who wanted to be a U.S. Supreme Court justice. Thank God Merrick Garland didn't get there. He's
because
a man.
Of Donald Trump.
What's that?
Because of Donald Trump.
Because of Mitch McConnell. And fair enough. Fair enough.
Donald Trump ended up getting the appointments because Mitch McConnell torpedoed. Right.
That's exactly right. And he's never been forgiven for it by a lot of people. I just thank God for him every day. Every time Merrick Garland does something this overtly, radically political, I thank God that he didn't get on the court. I just do. Now, let's go to the search warrant on the Trump raid just real briefly, because that was said at the time to be a general warrant. And even if that's an overstatement, even an overly broad warrant is unconstitutional, correct?
Yes, unenforceable. Yes.
They enforced it. They took. Right. They admitted they took stuff they weren't supposed to have.
The issue won't be decided unless and until they indict Trump.
And they've indicted him. So aren't we looking at a case of the fruits of the poisonous tree then?
That they may not win this case in the end. The goal was not to win the case. The goal was to stop him from being a candidate for president.
I just want more people to look at this situation and say, this is just wrong on its face. There isn't one decent argument except the one you brought up that would say that there should have been any charge against Donald Trump on this. You know what? You've been around a long time, Harvey. Have you ever seen anything like this?
No. And I've been doing this since 1967.
This is worse than anything Richard Nixon dreamed about doing. Agreed?
Yep.
Okay. Now, we're looking at a case of the fruits of the poisonous tree in this case. This thing it seems to me, and I don't know about the ins and outs, but you could bring up all of these, the case law, the Constitution, all of this, and ask for a summary judgment, couldn't you? And just have this bad boy tossed?
Yes. But don't you see, the purpose of what they're doing is not to win. The purpose is to keep him from running for president. And once you look at it from that point of view, it answers a lot of these questions.
But okay, and agreed, absolutely agreed. But because this is the feature, not the bug. So we have people who suggest that this also might be a blind behind which Biden could be planning a big grand exit. Clearly he's a guy who's lined up, Gavin Newsom to come in the event, or, who knows, the bluebird of Michelle Obama come in, when he decides he's not going to run anymore, because he just can't do that right now for whatever reason. Maybe he's waiting for Michelle because she doesn't want to run for president. She just wants to be the president. Who knows? But the thing is that there might be a case in which Biden might be looking for a way to pardon him and his family, and Trump too, through this whole process, and make him look good.
If Biden were to lose the presidency, I have very little doubt that he would pardon himself and his whole family and his friends. I think that would happen.
If by some chance Trump were found criminally liable here in this case, have you ever heard of somebody saying that they didn't want a pardon? I mean, if you were Trump, I'm sure Trump would take it because he's just that guy. He just wants to get on with his life. But I mean,
I don't offhand know of a single case where a person would turn down a pardon.
Because this case never should have been brought, which we agree on. Would you ever give up now this case is made in part by piercing the attorney-client privilege, right? And there are notes from Trump's attorney. There are notes from Trump's attorney in which he says, well, and a recording in which he said that this is a document that says X, Y, and Z, without knowing whether that person was able to A, see the document, B, comprehend the document. He just took Trump's word for it. Now, all of this is pretty. Would you accept if, let's say, you had a legal assistant, somebody who was an associate in your law firm, and who came up with, I think this might fly. I mean, I don't actually have proof of this, but would you tell him to go find something else to put in the indictment?
Yeah.
Would you ever give up your notes to prosecutors?
Nope.
What should they have done?
I would let that go to the Supreme Court, which would, I think, back to my position.
Yeah. Are you shocked that they gave up some records? It's just easy to give up Trump records, right? Because he's such an unlikable dude. Yep.
I'm shocked and disappointed.
Should they be disbarred?
I think that it's certainly a close question. They don't deserve to be in the positions that they're in.
So they left Trump's employ on the very day that the indictment was handed up. And
go on.
No, I was going to say the reason was because they were outed in the document as having given up their private notes. And by the way, do you take notes on your clients?
Of course I do. And those are privileged. I've never had them subpoenaed. I've never had them seized.
Have you ever been asked for them?
No, I think because the prosecutors I've dealt with know that I'm not going to give them up. There's no sense asking.
It has, in this case, what impact would that have on the case?
Well, I think any prosecution is going to be so tainted that it's not going to succeed. But as I've said before, the purpose of this is not to succeed. It's to keep him from running for president.
Okay, so you say that, and you've said it multiple times during this interview. Great. I understand that. Perfect clarity. Now aren't we in a banana republic? This is ridiculous.
We're certainly heading in that direction, and that's why all this is so dangerous. And the people who are doing this should be ashamed of themselves. Mm-hmm. But, of course, they're not. They think they're virtuous.
So I've heard an attorney I respect talking about the different things that have happened to Donald Trump in this particular prosecution. And, he's been denied his Fourth Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment rights, Sixth Amendment rights, and arguably his First Amendment rights. What are they going to do? Bat for the cycle and go for all of them?
Probably. I mean, I don't know. I can't predict. This is new territory. This is not something that we've experienced before. And all I can tell you is that I believe this is an assault on democracy, because the powers that be are trying to avoid having a popular candidate run for re-election. And so that's why I said at the beginning of this interview, it's candidate suppression. That's the motive. It's so obvious that I'd love to debate somebody on the other side, because I'd make mincemeat of him or her or it.
And yet you have an entire Department of Justice arrayed, preparing to go after the president again. Now, I recognize it's one of their 2016 efforts didn't work. Their 2020 efforts did work. Now they're coming back after 2024. I'm afraid for our country.
And I've had a long held position that the FBI should be abolished because it's incurable, unreformable. It has the culture of J. Edgar Hoover that never got rid of that. And it's basically a criminal organization, incapable of reforming. I think if you need a federal law enforcement agency, we have to have a whole new organization with a new name, new leadership, new agents, because the only way of getting rid of that culture of lying, of phoning up reports. Let me tell you about one of my pet peeves, among many. If the FBI wants to interview you, you get a lawyer. The FBI agents say, well, could you come down to FBI headquarters? If your lawyer has half a brain, the lawyer would say, no, let's do it in my office. The agents show up. How many agents show up? 2. Always 2. One takes notes and the other one does the Q&A. Those notes are typed up in a report known as a Form 302 report. It is the official record of what's asked and, crucially, answered. Now, the reason the FBI doesn't allow, under its there's a written regulation that they will not conduct an interview that is tape recorded. The reason for this is that these Form 302s are almost never accurate. The Form 302s have what they wish the interviewee had said, rather than what the interviewee really said. And then, if the interviewee is going to is called as a witness at the trial, he or she, if he testifies contrary to the Form 302, he's susceptible to being indicted for a felony. Why? Because the argument the government has is, if the 302 is the official record of what he said, and he testifies under oath differently, then he's committed perjury. Or, if the testimony is true, then what he told the FBI was false, and it's a crime, it's a 5-year felony to lie to a federal official. So you're caught between a stone and a hard place, and these witnesses, they testify as the FBI report says they, well, we know what the FBI report says that they said at the interview. And that's why the FBI doesn't allow recording. It's really, it's a scam, and it should be a crime. But of course, who's going to enforce it against the FBI? So as I said, it has to be abolished. It's just beyond hope.
I am more and more agreeing with you. This is the intelligence aspect of the FBI has expanded geometrically and turned its intelligence network and arrayed it against the American people. And, let me ask you something to clarify. You talked about January 6th, and on our previous discussion, you talked about how the way in which they have gone after January 6th protesters and or rioters, or trespassers, etc., is unconstitutional. Could you sort of suss that out for me?
Well, I think that what they've done is they have greatly expanded the definition of riot, and they have now blurred the line between riot and legitimate protest. And this is meant to keep demonstrations from happening in the future. And it violates the First Amendment, in my view, quite clearly.
And so as they rounded them up, there was, we talked to a January 6th protester who was a trespasser. We talked to the QAnon shaman guy, the guy with wearing the horns. And he couldn't really tell us a whole heck of a lot, but we do know that he didn't do anything that violated, he didn't commit a crime per se. He admitted, or his attorney had him plead out to the was it a 502 or whatever it is, basically interrupting an official proceeding, which they're bootstrapping onto all of these just to get them on a federal felony. And so I just wonder, I was talking to him and I thought the way in which they went after and prepared, they actually went out and got people before they actually had probable cause, I think. Oh yeah, you were there. We're going to come shake you down for information to take you in. Now, not all of them were taken in. Some of them were questioned and released. But that sort of wholesale approach to going after people because you think an entire swath of population has done something wrong, it seems on its face wrong to me. How am I wrong about that?
You're right. If you have to analyze the conduct of the individual and see if it really broke a law, and you have to be very careful not to be trapped by the vagueness of federal criminal statutes. And this is a case in which it's reasonable to say that most, not all, most of these cases are political prosecutions. That's something we haven't had in the United States since when? I mean, there were a few political prosecutions during the Vietnam War, but I can't remember in my lifetime.
Let me ask you one more question. I know you're going to say that this is all about something else, but just if you were trying to win this case in court, can't the whole case be thrown out just because there was no crime, because the president gets to say what's classified and unclassified, and that which he takes out of the White House are his documents?
Yes, I think that ultimately that would be the result. But guess what? That would occur after the next election.
And if there's no crime, you can't breach attorney. You can't convince or cajole or coerce someone into breaching attorney-client privilege, correct?
Correct.
Okay, then what the hell are we doing here?
Well, we know what we're doing here. It's candidate suppression. I said that a while ago.
I know. I know. And I'll stop it because I know the listeners are probably thinking, yes, Victoria, we know. Let me ask you something. It's so gobsmacking to know that the Justice Department is going after a former president for his documents. And nothing ever leaked until the FBI got involved. And yet, the FBI and the DOJ leak all the time in order to create a particular media narrative. And I know that we both know that's wrong on all levels because it is prejudicial to a would-be jury as well as prejudicial to the court of public opinion. And that's the design feature of this. And yet on this day, you and I are talking on the day that we learn that Daniel Ellsberg has died at the age of 92. And he's the guy who leaked the Pentagon Papers that gave chapter and verse about all the lies and distortions that were told in order to get us into the Vietnam War on a large-scale basis, and about which President Nixon went to court to stifle the publication and to stop it because he thought that there were national security implications involved there. And these papers were not about Richard Nixon. He just wanted to preserve the idea that the national security documents are national security documents. And on this day, Daniel Ellsberg is celebrated for having leaked those documents and the New York Times having published them. And President Trump is reviled and indicted.
Don't tell me that you are stunned that we have double standards here.
I'm not stunned at all.
Yeah,
I just want people to know. Did you ever meet Daniel Ellsberg? Did you know him?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
I also represented Senator Mike Gravel. Senator Gravel actually had a copy of the papers, and he got up and he started to read them at a session of the Senate, for which he was excoriated. But what he pointed out was that there was nothing in there that really was national security. It was embarrassing to the administration. You know, that's what
not the Nixon administration. It was embarrassing to the Johnson administration.
The Johnson administration, and you know, the joke among us criminal lawyers is that the biggest national security secret that the government works very hard to keep secret is that so many of our political leaders are idiots.
I knew you were going there. Oh, that is so true. They really don't like to be embarrassed, do they?
They do not like to be embarrassed.
Where does this Trump case go now? You don't think it'll ever get to a courtroom? Jonathan Turley doesn't think it'll ever get to a courtroom.
I don't think it'll get to a courtroom, but the goal was never to bring it to a courtroom. The goal was to stop Donald Trump from being a candidate for president. It's so palpably clear. It isn't even funny.
It's not funny. It's not funny. Any last thoughts on this case besides what you've already said? I would just like to have you talk about the legal profession allowing such a distortion of the law to proceed.
Well, I'm not proud of a lot of the lawyers who are on this, and they should be ashamed of themselves. What more can I say? It hasn't put the legal profession in a good light. Lawyers as it is have difficulty with the reputation of the bar. A lot of people don't understand how the legal system works. They think, people have said to me, you represent such a horrible person. I said, look, calm down. If I was a cardiologist and this horrible person got a heart attack in a movie theater and I happened to be in the movie theater, I would lose my license if I didn't resuscitate this horrible person. But as a lawyer, I represent the constitutional rights of horrible people, or people who seem to be horrible, and I'm looked upon as some kind of monster. Fortunately, to quote a great movie line, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. I don't. I've developed a very thick skin precisely because of the number of hypocrites and idiots and fools who criticize the exercise of constitutional rights.
I wanted to ask you something about the John Eastman case, I guess. What's going on with that?
Well, I can't talk too much about it. He's my client. But I'll tell you this. He acted as a lawyer. And he acted within the bounds of the law. And if he's indicted, he's going to win. I have a very high confidence that he's going to win. I'm hoping that we are able to keep them from indicting him, because being indicted is no fun, even if you win in the end. But I don't believe he's committed a crime. And I also think that the press doesn't understand what he did. I had upon the publication of one particularly egregious story, I asked the reporter to meet with me. He was very surprised. I met with the lawyer with the reporter for an hour, and I think he understood what I was talking about. Too bad I didn't meet with him before he did the report. But too many reporters are not legally sophisticated. They should be. I went to law school with the aim not of being a lawyer. I went to law school with the aim of being a reporter who would be sophisticated in legal matters. But I got so interested in the law that I decided to practice law instead of journalism, although I still write a lot of columns and articles. I'm sort of, 1/3 of my time is spent writing rather than litigating.
Plus, lawyers need to be good writers.
But our reporters do not understand enough about the law, and they should.
Yeah, that's true. Harvey Silverglate, always a wonderful, open-eyed discussion with you. I really appreciate your point of view, and I'm so pleased that you're on the right side and not the bad guy side. I mean,
and I appreciate your asking me intelligent questions.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that's high honor.
You don't know how uncommon that is these days.
Well, I try to book up. I try to book up when I talk to you. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Righto.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Adult in the Room podcast. To keep the programs you like to listen to, please rate this podcast with a fantastic 5 stars on your Apple Podcast app every time you listen. And give me a great review. Plus, of course, subscribe to the podcast. It makes a difference with the big tech algorithm and the big tech oligarchs, and it makes us easier to find. Please get in touch with me on all the big tech stuff. Yeah, we're still there. Using the names Victoria Taft or the Adult in the Room podcast on MeWe, Parler, Minds, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks to 1ACast for imaging, editing, and production. The fantastic song is Gospel by the March 4th Band of Portland, Oregon. Music for Antifa versus Mike Strickland is Ride or Die by Raps by RC. The Adult in the Room podcast is also a production of Flamingo Road Studios. Remember, head up, heart out, and strive to be the adult in the room. Till next time, mischief managed.